Just going to give it some juice and keep it in one place. And there we have it. Look at her go. Hi there everyone, welcome up here to Weir Yard with me, Jenny Kirk. And today what I'm going to be doing is a little project that's come about by special request actually, following on from my previous Smart Power Pack fitting sessions, both for the split chassis and also for the venerable Hornby X-Daypole Pug. People have been asking me about the N-Gauge Smart Power Pack, which I showed at the beginning of one of those videos, and asking whether they're suitable for use on 00 locomotives, and the answer is very much a resounding yes. So here is the guinea pig. Today I'll show you how to DCC fit this locomotive, the older style Bachmann Ginty, venerable locomotive, but the early ones are not DCC ready, and I'll show you how to massively improve the performance with the application of that Smart Power Pack with the N-Gauge form factor, and how that fits snugly into the boiler barrel of this locomotive. So come with me, it'd be great to have your company, and let me show you how it's done. So here we have our guinea pig locomotive. It's one of the venerable Bachmann Ginty 060 tank locomotives. They've been around a while. The basic design hasn't changed. It's a really good model. And what you can see from this, it's a little bit dark, which obviously doesn't really help on camera massively. This particular one is in Somerset and Dorset joint railway livery, but Bachmann has released them in Midland Railway maroon. I think actually it's the later LMS livery, which is the Midland Railway maroon. They've also done them in the BR black, LMS black, and whilst this is a special commission in the SDJR livery, they also did number 23 as well. Now, if you get an older one, they are not DCC ready, and that can be a bit of a pain. As you'll see inside them, it's a little bit difficult on space, but this gives us the ideal opportunity to put to work the N-Gauge version of the Smart Power Pack. Don't let the fact that it says it's the one for N-Gauge put you off. It works equally well on a 00 locomotive. What it does have is a slightly different form factor, so it's long and thin, which really lends it to going into smaller locomotives, primarily an N-Gauge, but also where space is at a premium, such as inside this locomotive. These can really work wonders. And actually, even though it's a smaller electrolytic capacitor, it doesn't really impinge on the running a great deal. So I have been asked to show this off by a number of people who commented on my previous video, and so it seemed the ideal opportunity to make this locomotive actually a really good DCC runner. Now, I've chosen to go with it the Train-O-Matic 6-pin decoder. The reason for this is partly because this is one that I had available to me here and now, but also it's exactly the same price as the 8-pin decoder, but you have 2 less wires to worry about. So when you're space-starved, sometimes that can just make it a little bit easier. It's exactly the same price, and in fact, actually, the base chip that's here is exactly the same chip. You can actually see the 2 blank solder pads where it would have the 2 extra pins, and the only difference is this plug. And what I found is actually the 8-pin decoders are very, very popular, so sometimes they temporarily sell out, but these do seem to be a little bit easier to get hold of. So that's just my thoughts on the matter. I've also got here my trusty soldering iron. I've got some jeweler's screwdrivers, and I've also got my solder. And I've also picked out a sharp craft knife. If you remember from the previous video we did showing how to fit the Smart Power Pack, we just used that to cut away a little bit of the heat shrink on the decoder to expose the solder tabs to be able to solder the Smart Power Pack to those. And I've also got, just to help pare back any wires we need to, some needle nose pliers and some wire cutters. So that's pretty much all the tools that you're going to need. Now the locomotive itself, like I said before, these can be picked up really quite cheaply second hand. And in these days of escalating prices, it is a really good budget way of building up your railway fleet by picking up the non-DCC ready ones and then converting them. And then you get the double whammy. You're getting the locomotive cheap, but you're then converting it to DCC, and with this you're making it run really, really reliably. And I'll just show you once we're done just how well these run with the smart power pack installed. So they just come out, flathead, jeweler screwdriver, lever them up, and that will expose the two screws that allow us to take the body off. So there's one. Once they are out, then you can see it just pulls out, and there's no sign of a DCC decoder socket. On the later versions, you'll find an 8-pin socket here, and the lead weight inside the boiler barrel is not there, giving you the space to put the decoder. So first up, we need that space, and you might be worried losing some of the adhesion weight in this locomotive, and believe me, it doesn't actually make a huge amount of difference. This weight comes out by undoing this screw and this screw, and what you'll find is that the weight goes loose. I'm just going to try and use the needle nose pliers just to pull that free, and then there's your little weight. The later models just don't have this, which I guess tells you that it wasn't really needed in the first place. But once we've done that, you can discard that, you don't need it. We've got our space down inside the boiler to put all of the electronic gubbins. The next step that I want to do is to gain access here, and there's like a plastic retainer, and it's just held on with a single screw. So don't lose this. We're going to want to put this back in for neatness to be able to hold wires in place, and all it is like a little angled piece of plastic. So put that to one side, and that exposes the circuit board, which we can lose in its entirety. Do not worry about this this circuit board. It doesn't do anything on DCC. In fact, if anything, you want to lose that, and you want to lose these as well, and you'll make sure that you have a lot better running. So I'm just going to pull that off, and the wires from the pickups come out cleanly. They're just held in, they're not soldered in. And then I'm going to remove the wires that go from the circuit board to these by just unsoldering them. Just be very careful not to burn yourself. It can be quite easily done. That, bin it. Don't need it. Right, next up, I'm going to just start work on freeing up some of these. These are actually, as far as I'm aware, to do with TV suppression when it runs on DC, and I wouldn't worry about it unnecessarily. So let's remove them. In fact, rather than heat shocking anything, these you can just snip them off. Again, you don't need any of these, bin them. So now we've got our motor and chassis all prepped to take the DCC decoder. So next up, what I want to do is to solder up the smart power pack to the DCC decoder. Of course, with this, I'm going to have to test it, so I'm going to use a different chassis, a 6-pin chassis, to test and make sure that all works as it should before we solder it into that locomotive. So I've just got these out of the packet, and first things first, I'm going to prepare the decoder. If I turn it over, you can see there we've got the 3 tabs by themselves. They are the ones we want. Forget about these 4 over here, they're for something else. So we want to cut away the heat shrink really carefully and then tin these with solder ready to accept the wires from the Smart Power Pack. And we need to go black, white, red. So red on the outer edge, white in the center of those three. So the job now is going to be very carefully start to cut away some of this heat shield. And like I said in the last video, just be very, very careful. What you don't want to do is damage any of the surface mount components. So there we are. We've got the solder pads cleared off there. Just let it focus. And we've got them ready that we're now going to tin them with the solder. So I'm going to turn my soldering iron back on. And again, cleanliness is the key. So I'm just going to let that warm up. And then what we need to do is to tin them, but like before, make sure that that solder doesn't bridge across them. If you do accidentally do that, your decoder will stop working. All is not lost, as I said before. All you have to do is very carefully clean the solder off those solder pads, and it should work just fine. So don't panic if you initially bridge them. You only need a little bit of solder on these, but it makes soldering to them so much easier and much less likely to damage any of the rest of the components with the heat. So I can hear that my soldering iron is up to temperature. So cleanliness, and I'm going to just tin that up. And what you can see there is that's how easy it is to bridge the contacts. But don't worry, this is how you get them cleaned off. Just gently scrape, clean the soldering iron, scrape, clean the soldering iron, scrape again, and there. As easy as that, we have unbridged the solder from across those contacts. They're all tinned, so no panics, everything is absolutely fine. Next up, I think these come ready tinned, but we're going to just make sure. And let me just get a new tool that I've got. So I've got one of these, which is really good for holding things just the way you need it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these to hold my wires free, and that means that I can tin them with solder relatively easily. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what we need on here is black, white, the center of these three tabs, and red on the outside edge. So let's go ahead and get that done. Like I've said before, just do them one at a time, work from one side to the other. And what I tend to find is best is if you get some solder on there, get that melted, because you're not going to heat damage anything if you melt the solder on the wire. And then what we're going to do is with this molten, touch to the tab, it should take instantly. What I'm doing here is just exposing a little bit more wire. Wasn't quite happy with the amount of wire. It's just making things a little bit difficult. So just extend that. And I'm not very good at soldering. I mean, honestly, I'm not. I'm probably one of the world's worst solderers. So if I can do this, you can do this. And that should be all three in place. What I want to do next is I want to test this in a 6-pin chassis, and that way we can make sure that the chip and Smart Power Pack is functioning. Now I can't use that class 17 chassis that I normally use on the 8-pin ones, So I'm going to find something in my fleet that we can plug it into. So I've got the chassis off an Electrotren 060, and this fortuitously has a 6-pin decoder socket. So just going to very carefully pull out the blanking plate, and that way we can test it on the programming track initially and just make sure that everything works as it should. So let's get that plugged in. Let's go over to the programming track and just make sure that we can actually, first of all, read the decoder. It should be on its default of 3, and then we're going to test it on the track to make sure that this is wired in properly. So we're going to go to Program, Read, Enter, Address, Enter, and we should get address number 3. I can hear the locomotive working, and there we go. That means that it's safe to put this on the main track and just see how well it performs. So before I do that, I got told off about this before, and I'm going to couple it to a wagon which I can put all this into, just to make sure that nothing touches the track. I can hear it trying to move, and there it goes. What I'm going to do is grab hold of it, lift it up, and it's still going round, which means our smart power pack is working. Now we can go ahead now, and what we're going to do is program the CV values. And what I will tell you about these is CV123 sets how long the locomotive continues to run if the power is interrupted, and I'm going to always set this to the maximum of 255. The default is 16, which gives you a quarter of a second. 255 attempts to get you the full 4 seconds, but it's dependent on how quickly the locomotive depletes that capacitor. Now CV124, that's your startup delay for charging, and I'm going to set that to a little bit less than the default of 10 seconds. Now CV29 is something I got asked about this, because apparently some people like to set it for a whole host of other things, so they were inquiring after it. Now, the reason CV29 is recommended to set to 10 is simply to turn off DC running. Essentially, if DC running is enabled, the Smart Power Pack does not respond. So they recommend, for simplicity, to set it to 10. If you have other things going on with CV29, then you will need to consult some information online just to make sure that you pick the right one, which allows you to do what you want to do whilst at the same time disabling DC running. But now we're happy that everything is working on this test chassis. Let's go ahead and get it soldered into our Bachmann Ginty. So first things first, we need to figure out which wire is which. Now, let's see, red and black go to the track. Grey and orange, or orange and grey, power the day. So what I'm going to suggest we do is, boom, lose the plug off the end. We can bin that. And then I'm just going to slide that off. And what we need to do is separate the wires that we do need from the wires that we don't. So red and orange, we need those. Grey and black, we need those. And what I'm going to do is trim right back the two that we don't need, and that just stops them from getting in our way and getting tangled up on everything. So red and black to the track. So those two, we're going to trim them back just a little bit on account of the locomotive already has some serious length of wire there. So I'm going to trim that back and trim that back, and then what I'm going to do is prep these wires up. Just use that to hold it, and then just bare some of these ends. We'll tin these with solder. I just twist the multi-strand wire, and that stops you from getting little frayed ends sticking out. And then let's get all these tinned before we go any further. And there's all our wires tinned. So next job, let's solder to the locomotive pickups there. Now, before I go any further, let me just work out. Yeah. So the decoder and the smart power pack is going to sit up here. Is that on? So that's those wired up, and then next job, I want to wire these together. We're just going to solder them together. Right. The next thing I want to do is just move some of this out of the way. I've got some black electrical tape and a pair of scissors, and we're just going to make sure that there's nothing on there to short. And let's just make sure that where we've soldered, that these are protected by electrical tape so that they cannot short out against each other. Because it is possible to cook a decoder by effectively getting the power going to the wrong place. Believe me, I've accidentally done it, not helped by a dry solder joint that was on a particular locomotive that allowed a wire to break free and played the full DCC track voltage across other content. I think it shorted with some of the auxiliary outputs, and it just literally blew the chip. So it can happen. Now that we're there, the next step is to consider how best to get these into there. Now, I also want to very carefully just protect where we've soldered to the contacts on the chip. Again, I don't want them brushing against anything, so I'm just going to very carefully separate out these wires that seem determined to tangle, and I am going to, in fact, a smaller piece even than that. And just make sure that that is protected. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the excess wire and this can be the tricky bit, making sure that this all fits down into there. Right, we're slowly getting there. I'm going to just protect some of the wires, put some of these pieces back in that we took out before. So we just fiddle that all into place and try and remember which of these screws is which. Get these couplings back in, and now we're ready to test it. So we got the locomotive onto the track and got it selected. I'm just going to give it some juice and keep it in one place, and there we have it. Look at her go. and that's from one of the N-Gauge smart power packs, which as you can see is more than enough to make this an incredible good performer. All that from a hardwire. The form factor of that smart power pack, the N-Gauge one, allows us to fit it in the boiler where the larger smart power pack wouldn't be able to fit. So what you can see from this video is it's perfectly possible to use the two different types of power packs very effectively to ensure that you can add them to pretty much any locomotive you choose. Well, I hope this video has been really useful to you. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and also subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, and you'll be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And I'd like to extend a big thanks to Train-O-Matic and Tramfabrique, who supplied the decoder and the smart power pack for road testing. So as you can see, it certainly has done a very effective job on this venerable old locomotive. But until next time, it's been really great having your company. I've really enjoyed showing you how to make the most out of these smart power packs. So from me up here in Weir Yard, it's just a case of thanking you for watching. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, but a special thanks go out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, and Helen Sink. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.